talk about the right to strike. The reason why we're going to be talking about the right to strike is, I don't know if any of you are aware, but there has been a strike going on in Israel last week and this week.
Like in baseball?
In the schools. What
davening that you said?
What davening are you talking about?
Didn't you say that for the two people? Didn't you say?
No, everyone just think about them
Can
now.
you write their names?
No.
No? Okay. Like, so strike like in baseball.
Huh?
Like in baseball.
What was going on there? Okay, what we're going to do is I'm going to go back. We'll do that at the end. Thank you for reminding me. What I'd like to do is I want to talk about the concept of a strike. It's a very popular idea. You know, nowadays there's been a strike.
Chicago strike on the schools about better education on here.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, there are lots of strikes that I'm not mentioning here, but I'll tell you what's interesting about talking about strikes. What's interesting is it's not a normative halachic topic like we learned about tzitzit last week, or tefillin, or mezuzah, or tefillah. And indeed, there is no siman in Shulchan Aruch. In the book of Jewish law, there's no siman that talks about the laws of how to strike. But what there are their stories. There are stories in the Talmud of various people that did various things that look very much like a strike, and how the rabbis responded to that. And then there's also modern rabbis today responding to a modern strike. So we're not going to come up with a psak halacha. What we will come with, I hope, and that's the reason why we're studying, is to appreciate how exciting halacha is, how exciting it is to live a life within which you can turn to our books, turn to the Talmud, and turn to later halachic authorities, and have insightful guidance in order to help us to figure out what to do, not just in an obviously halachic area of life, but even in an area of life striking, which is not a siman and Shulchan Aruch, but there are certainly ideas that we can read about that will give us a way of looking at the situation from a important perspective. Yes, Ezra.
So, basically, are you allowed to protest about something?
Oh, so that is our question. We're not really talking about can you protest. We're talking about really if someone's a strike.
Well, a strike is a kind of protest.
Yeah,
exactly.
A strike. Of course it is.
So if you're saying is that if someone can't strike, basically saying that they might not be able to protest.
No. A strike means if I'm paid to provide a certain service, and then because I'm not happy with my conditions, so then I stop providing that service. That's really a strike. That's what happened this week. The teachers here in Israel, and that that could be very justified, are very unhappy with the amount they get paid, and therefore the teachers' union decided that we're not going to open the schools. And indeed, on Sunday, and no, maybe it was Monday and Tuesday of this week, there was no school. One day last week, they started late. Not in all schools, but in many schools, there was no school. There may be, when I looked at this, according to the Jerusalem Post, may or may not be true, it says apparently the Israeli bus drivers were planning on having a strike tomorrow from 4 p.m. I haven't heard about that on the news other than seeing this over here.
I remember hearing about that before, about the bus drivers doing that. I remember them doing that, trying to do that on Sunday, I believe, or sometime last week, that they were going to, not work for a certain amount of time because of the low amount they're getting paid.
Right. And every once in a while, I think the last time was quite a while ago in Israel, there have been general strikes. A general strike is when all government workers, anyone who works in a union, they all strike.
But what is the goal of these groups? Are they actually trying to reshape their workplace into a workers' cooperative, or are they just making noise? What are their goals?
Excellent.
Make change, real change.
The teachers want to be paid more. They've made it clear they want to be paid more, because if you look at how much they're getting paid.
That's it. That's it. That's all they want.
I'm talking about the teachers.
I think they want higher budgets, not just for salaries. But
they want higher budgets for classroom materials as well. But it's a matter of money.
With the bus drivers, a lot of them are complaining that they don't have time to go to the bathroom. They have to go to the bathroom in buckets and bad conditions.
Conditions. Often what people are saying is often a very painful reality.
Mhm.
We're not actually here
To judge.
to solve any problems here. We're only here to bring some examples from Chazal and then also from modern halachic authorities, just to see how a Ben Torah grapples with this situation. Don't feel, sometimes, I know when I was in England, we used to have a weekend consisting of a Shabbat and a Sunday. And people used to say how Shabbat is the day of religion, sort of, we go to shul, you celebrate Shabbat meals, etc. That's your God day, that's Shabbat. And then you have Sunday, and then Sunday, go and watch a football or do whatever you want. And sort of God is very present on a Shabbat, on your holy day, and Sunday can sometimes be different. And I think the purpose of our discussion is to say that we need to have God consciousness or be aware of Ritzon Hashem, be understanding that, we have to live an appropriate way, not just in obvious things like tefillah, tzitzit, tefillin, making brachot, but also in all areas of our lives. There's an appropriate way to do things, and therefore that's why we're going to be looking at these stories. So you mentioned, Hirsch, about this debate. I just found two snippets. Would somebody read the right to strike and against the right to strike? Somebody read those two things?
Can I read the right to strike?
Yes, thank you so much.
But add some drama to it. Go
You don't need to ask Hirsch. That comes with the territory.
The Right to Strike, editorial Guardian newspaper, London, November 2011. History has shown us that the larger the walkout, the more likely ministers are to shift further. That's why union members, on average, earn 15% more than the rest. Strikes are also a reminder of who actually does the work that matters most to our lives, and a demonstration of democratic strength in the workplace. I do have a question. Amongst B'nai Torah who do engage in this topic, are two camps. One that's more like, yes, worker rights, and the other like, shut up, stop striking, go back to work, listen to your boss. Are these two camps?
Yes, yeah. I don't think it's a clear, obvious halachic perspective here. But it's important to know that it's the halacha is something that impacts all areas of our lives. And I think it's important for us to understand that. I might reach a different conclusion to you. And different people could come to different conclusions, but understand that it's not something that is divorced from my avodat Hashem, from my halachic observant life. Okay, that's one side. Someone read the other side.
I volunteer.
Thank you so much, Moishela.
Ethics of Industrial Action, Dr. Bill Robb. It's time to call a spade a spade. Striking is simply dishonest, cowardly, and unethical, claims Dr. Bill Robb, an Aberdeen-based ethics expert. Dr. Bill is a director of the Center for Alleviating Social Problems Through Values Education. He goes on to claim that strikers are cowardly. Strikers know that no other employer will value them more highly and hence pay them more. Surely, if your employer is wrong, it makes sense to find a better employer and better pay. If all workers resign from, say, the Royal Mail today, the business would begin to fail. And employers would then realize the value of the workforce. Of course, strikers know that thousands of people are waiting to snap up those jobs at the existing wage. Strikers are too cowardly to test their value by resigning and seeking a better job. But that's hang on. Everything
I kind of have to argue on
that
that
no,
point.
that makes very little sense. The idea that are too cowardly to test their value by resigning, by striking, you put yourself at risk of being fired.
Absolutely,
So
yeah.
you're practically resigning.
And one thing I
You
want
get
to
a
say,
lot of
is
money if you're fired.
this one is based on deontological values and isn't really citing anything.
That's
This
not
one
always.
does citing this.
Okay, I'll tell you what I'd like to do. Before
Everywhere else,
I want to say something. Usually people who are trying to look for better pay, they're also they're trying to look for another job at the same time too. It's not that they're too cowardly to go find a better job for them. They're kind of already in the middle of a better job, just not fast enough as they can get it though, and therefore they're probably protesting because they need a better way to make more money. This is the only way how. So basically saying is that they're too coward to quit and find a better job. It doesn't actually mean that doesn't prove anything. They're probably not
I
coward at
understand.
all.
I know it's quite harsh,
In
but the
Canada,
truth.
they made it illegal for all people who deliver mail to go on strike.
Right.
They legit did that when I was in high school there,
That's
like 3 or
interesting.
4 years ago.
Okay, thank you for that, Ezra. People people in the room. Our goal, I don't think we're going to solve the issue about whether it's ethical or unethical. That's not really what we're trying to do. I think it's interesting that there are Jewish sources that look at these things. But before we get there, the 3 points I want you to think about very briefly, and this is how we're going to do it. The 3 things are: number 1, in what situation do you think it would be acceptable to strike? Are there any professions for which it would be morally wrong to strike? For example, doctors, or even, let's say, airline pilots. The people,
They have been strikes.
you have to travel from one place to
I
another.
have a friend who
For
got
a-
screwed over by El Al because of this. There was a problem with El Al
Okay.
in his bag, so I stuck in Frankenfurt.
Okay, so there are any jobs? Okay, let's continue. And then the last question is, what other actions do you think people could take other than striking? Now, what I want you to do is, I don't want to have a general discussion on that right now. What I'd like you to do is, you are sitting next to, each one of you is sitting next to an incredibly intelligent, thoughtful individual.
We got 9.
Can you speak to the person sitting next to you, this intelligent individual, and spend just 2 minutes pondering these questions? Is that okay?
Can I say something? Well, I think it's something important to point out.
Oh, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Good.
This isn't just a simple management versus labor, because in these scenarios, the bus drivers and the teachers, the management is the state, and the money that they have, it's not like it's their hard-earned money that you did get kidding over here. It's not like it's their hard-earned money that they're like being squeezed. It's not their money at all. It's the state funds,
Right,
and that brings a whole different dynamic
taxpayers' money.
to the striking and negotiations.
It's like more nuanced.
Okay, yes, yeah, it's not like they come from their pocket. Good point. Can you spend 2 minutes, people, pondering these 3
Let's
questions?
just kind of bounce off. Let's kind of bounce off this real quick. No, we don't need to go into detail.
When the material
What 3 questions are you talking about?
conditions and the
On the bottom of page 1, 3 questions.
And what situation is acceptable? I think it's
Hey,
when
you
the
wanna
services
do it together,
that
Get a cup.
workers
What's
provide.
is acceptable to take?
Right.
Well,
With the environment has
what do you
working
think?
is that where one feels
Sure, I haven't
that
heard
their
that one in
dignity and their rights are being disrespected.
The first thing you write, you want to
They're
strike?
treated in an undignified way.
I want to hear you. What do you think?
I think it's possibly
Even though he's
ethical
the
if the
diversity
person
is
is not
covered in
Yeah,
values,
it's
values,
kind of
still treated in a
served
dignified
not
way. Yeah,
usually with somebody
likewise,
or
you
like
have a
you got a
doctor
situation
who's
where
working
like
for
a certain
working
but
16-hour
done
shifts,
about it, I
7
think that's
days,
absolutely fine.
7 days a week.
Because
For
like
months
after all,
straight.
change
Yeah,
does
I mean,
kind of
he's
have to
treated
happen
like a doctor and he has a
through the
really comfortable chair
years.
sitting in
Besides,
his office.
inflation goes up
But that's
every
not-
month, every single
that's
year,
not-
so therefore you're gonna have more money to pay for the bills and everything and all. If you're not getting a better raise to pay for the bills and everything
And
and all,
teachers,
then it feels like the boss is like taking more money away from you and everything and all, not giving it
As
to
much
you.
as people like
And like he's not giving it to poor people. So I think there is like some I think there is like some
Doctor
reasons when
striking?
you're allowed to
Like the doctor who
strike and everything. But if you're just striking because everyone else
Hospital strike, that's problematic, but here's the thing. When
I guess
hospital
that
workers
makes sense.
strike, it's hurt.
But like I bet a lot of
So,
people would know that or
At
something.
the same time, it's difficult to say. It's difficult to draw a line. I do not think there is a line
But
to
if
draw.
you're just striking because everyone else is,
service workers
then
strike, it
I guess
has
that
an
makes
impact
sense.
because not only are they screwing over their bosses.
It's really
yeah.
people.
Yeah.
But
I
it's
wouldn't
like,
say screwing over the
that adds
bosses.
more power.
That adds always morally wrong.
That gets power.
That's why I'm saying
That's why I think when you were actually became a work condition, there's something that construction workers do.
Maybe for a
Which is
chemist
they would
or
mail
for like a physicist or something and all, someone whose job
strike.
is
They would just
isn't like
they would just like
always
mail
like
crazy amounts of stuff. But they would just deliver
demanding or something and all,
packages to offices.
and everything.
So
and
if
all,
you're really
but
mad at someone, you know,
like jobs that are
Yeah.
not like jobs
you
that
know,
are
that's some just
demanding,
but like
I guess.
construction workers, like let's say you have a truck, you would drop off, a couple hundred kilograms worth of gravel
I mean,
in the parking lot of your boss.
say, what other
Then they gotta clear out that gravel.
worker if they protest against their
Yeah.
work?
So what that is yeah, you're going to work, but you're also doing this stuff on the side.
I already tell them that, like, So you don't strike.
Off your boss.
How do the people in Texas strike?
That's the natural way.
This thing called a union that you put
They
organize.
General Motors, there was a General Motors strike. They stopped showing up to work.
Contract that you're allowed
What I believe is that
And General Mills also had a strike.
where
People just stepped through work, and there were signs.
No, no.
Outside the factory. Yeah, the factory was
We were
right on
actually
the main
both
highway.
same.
So people saw the signs. People they were heard. They were heard.
Most of the kids are older.
Why did they strike and still the union?
Here you
I think I do a good job.
Yeah, you get killed.
Just trade out
I think it's
negotiate the better payment. Okay,
No,
that's
it's bad.
questions. I think
I hate the government.
only
so
be
you-
determined if
You do?
Okay,
It's a
people in the room, can we return to our questions? Did you everyone have a opportunity? Everyone had an opportunity to contemplate for a few minutes.
Hershey, did you contemplate?
Yeah.
Okay, well if he did, then everything's good.
I just think that if
I think it's the only thing.
I don't know, I think
Okay.
the most effective is to eventually form.
Would anyone like to share? Anyone have a thought that they would like to share with everybody else? Yes, Moishala.
I remember reading on the news that a while ago, this was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, there was construction workers who were having particular anger towards their company.
Oh, yeah.
And what they were what they decided to do is they decided to show up to work, but it's what they did on the side. So they would take dirt, they would have trucks full of dirt from digging, and instead of putting it on a pile or something, or however they dispose of it, they would put it in the parking lot of the office of their company. They would mail them 2x4s. They would, they would do various things to interrupt the behind-the-scenes business process, like the office process. They would basically disturb and disrupt the office work
Right.
of the company. What that did is first off, it got them on the news, because when you see a large pile of gravel or dirt piled up in a corporate office in a corporate parking lot, or you hear some mail worker posts online, hey, someone was mailing 2x4s. That gets caught on the news. Second
Sure.
off, it's a lot. Who has to deal with these problems? It's the people in the office. So the people in the office may not relate as much to the guys working in the field, working on the construction site. They start to see, hey, like these guys have a lot of anger, so they start to question what's really going on. What are they having to say? But on top of it, I mean, they're getting their quotas met. It's not interfering with their work, and it's not interfering with regular people. Like construction workers can just stop traffic if they want to.
Right.
So they're not really disturbing a lot of people, but they're getting their message to who they want the message.
That's a very effective. You're saying that's very effective.
I think it was very effective.
Very interesting. So, okay, thank you for that story. Very interesting story. Thank you, Moishla. That's really b'chokhmah, because it's sort of making a statement with making enough noise to cause change, but not enough disadvantaging of the general public, which would be perhaps unethical. Thank you. That was an excellent story. I might to add that. That was brilliant.
I will find you the source.
Please, I would love to see that. Thank you. Anyone else have any comments or thoughts from this? יש לך משהו להוסיף? Gilad HaChayal at the back.
Thank you for that. What about essential services though? So doctors and military.
We're going to come to that, Bezrat Hashem.
I'm not really it's not my opinion. I'm just asking what
We're going to come to that at the end. There was a very famous strike in 1986 in Israel, a nurses' strike, and the many rabbanim got involved. We're going to look at that at the end.
Like pro and against the rabbanim?
We'll see. We'll get there. We'll get to that at the end. I want to start with your permission. First of all, strikes are complicated, but they're ethically complicated. It's really an ethical question. Before we start, I just want to tell you about an article, because this article is sort of at the back of my mind in our discussion. I want to bring it to the forefront of my mind and then share it with you as well. There was an essay that I read when I was in college. It was written by a very, very important halachic authority here in Israel. His name was Harav Aaron Lichtenstein. He was the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Alon Shvut. And he wrote an excellent article in English called Does Judaism recognize an ethic outside of halakha? Meaning, can I observe all of halakha and still be an unethical person? That's really like the question that he was talking about. And can I say that ethics is part of halakha? And it's a beautiful essay, and I really encourage you. It's probably available somewhere as a PDF to read online.
I would feel like halacha is based on ethics most of the time. Like, not allowed to kill, not allowed to steal, not allowed to do all this stuff that are bad, and even non-Jews shouldn't be doing it all in the first place. Serving other idols and everything, and all, doing inappropriate relationships and everything. I feel like that some of the ethics have to be on halakha.
That's true. You're right.
Not all the time. What's the little gap?
Oh, nice, good, well done, nice, good point there, Hirsch. Yeah, the question, that's exactly your point. I mean, if I observe all of halakha, does that guarantee that I'll be an ethical person? That's really the question he was talking about.
That is most likely only an ethical person would observe all of halacha.
No, but that guarantee.
Hypothetically, it could exist that an unethical person would observe all of halacha, but
For ulterior purposes.
But if they're doing it for ulterior purposes, are they really observing the halacha? So if you like say wrap tefillin, if you wrap tefillin just to say, well, I just want these people to think I want them to think that I'm a good man who wraps tefillin. I really don't care. You really wrap
Or
tefillin?
showing off on Instagram.
Right.
Look at me, I'm so Jewish.
So the question. I just want to very briefly say his conclusion. I'll tell you what Rabbi Lichtenstein said, and then we'll come to your point, and I explain why I mention it now as well. Rabbi Lichtenstein really said it depends very much how you define halakha. But assuming that you have a wide enough definition of halakha, the halakha is really, an effort to do Ritzon Hashem. The wider definition of halakha would include ethics as well. And I think that part of our discussion today is to discuss to what extent is our discussion about striking, is that a halachic discussion or not? So on a very narrow definition of halakha, we would say this doesn't appear in Shulchan Aruch. However, we would say somebody who takes halakha seriously would want to find out a halachic question, an answer. If I'm a worker and if I was a teacher last week and I was due to teach kids some Torah, so I would be interested to know, is that halachically acceptable for me to strike? Would that be yes?
This might be an example of a smaller difference between the Soloveitchik non-Orthodox worldview and the Torah Israel worldview. With Rav Tzvi Yehuda writes quite differently that Emunah comes before mitzvot, and he points to the Birkat Torah. It says Asher Bacharbanu Mikol Amim before saying V'natan Lanu et Torah. So you have to internalize, as you said, God consciousness and Jewish consciousness, and with that ethical consciousness before you could go into Torah.
That is excellent.
Excellent. The pratim come from the klalim, and not the other way around.
Excellent. That is absolutely excellent.
So Yishad, is Rav Kook saying that you need emunah to have the covenant with the mitzvah?
Yes.
Very interesting.
Very lovely. Thank you very, very much. Excellent. Good. Okay, I mentioned that as an introduction. That's why we're going to be looking at Jewish sources. These are not halachics. They're not classic halachic sources, but there are halachic authorities grappling with the question of unhappy people and how you might, what would be a halachic way to deal with it. So we're going to start by looking at a Mishnah. A Mishnah, the very last Mishnah in the third chapter of Masechet Yoma. Masechet Yoma is the Masechet of Mishnah that talks all about Yom Kippur. And the majority of the Masechet talk about the avodah of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippurim in the Beit HaMikdash. That's the majority of the book. The end, right at the end of Masechet Yoma, it talks about Yom Kippur nowadays, but the majority is talking about the Kohen Gadol Beit HaMikdash Yom Kippur. The end of the third perek is describing the Avodah in the Beit HaMikdash, and then the Mishnah sort of gets onto this diversion to talk about some great people that were involved in the building of the Beit HaMikdash. And the Mishnah tells us, the penultimate Mishnah tells us the names of various people whose names should be remembered for a blessing. Various people that built various things in the Beit HaMikdash, and because of the things that they did in the Beit HaMikdash, their names should be remembered for a blessing. That's the Mishnah before the last one. But then unfortunately, the last Mishnah, the very last Mishnah of Masechet Yoma, chapter 3, talks about various people who didn't do such great things at the time of the Beit HaMikdash, and the opposite. Not only should their names not be remembered for a blessing, but their names should be remembered not for a blessing. And this is the Mishnah. The Mishnah, I actually translated, I must have got this translation, I'm guessing, from one of the translations online, but I can't remember which one. So the Mishnah says, these are to be condemned, meaning these are the families, and the Mishnah lists a number of families that we do not remember for a blessing. And one of the families who remembered not for blessing, they are the family of Avtinas. Avtinas were the family that knew how to make the incense. They knew how to make the ketoret, the beautiful incense. The Gemara here tells us, just in brackets, in parentheses, just a great thing about this family. The family of Avtinas never wore perfume. And the reason why they never wore perfume is because they were always involved in the ketoret. Their hands smelt good. They smelt good, right? But they didn't want to wear perfume, and then people would derive benefit from smelling the ketoret in a non-ketoret smelling scenario. And therefore, in order to avoid the ketoret not being smelled in out of context, this family never wore perfume. So they were great people, but they are condemned. What did they do? Would someone like to read in English what the family of Avtinas did? Who wants to read? Ezra. Thank you.
These are to be commended. The house of Atinas,
Condemned.
The house of Atinas did not want to teach the art of making the incense. Okay. The house of Tinas did not teach others the art of making incense. The sages taught the house of Tinas was expert in the art of making the incense, yet they did not want to teach it to others. The sages sent to Alexandria in Egypt for experts to replace them. They, the Alexandrians, knew how to mix the incense like the house of Atinas did, but not how to make the smoke rise like they did. The incense of the house of Atinas would rise straight like a stick, and that of the Alexandrians scattered to and fro.
The smoke. So they were very, very talented. Now continue. Here we're going to come to the strike.
When the sages heard this, they said,
Heard how talented these people were.
all that Hashem created is for his glory, as it says, he fashioned all for his sake. The house of Atinas returned to their place.
So do you know what the people of these people did? The house of Avtinas went home, meaning they refused to go. They went on strike. Do you see that? When it says they returned to their place, these are people that are supposed to be making the incense, and they return home. Then what happens?
Insensitive.
Yes. Oh, that was awful. But thank you very, very much. Yushai, thank you.
I think I didn't say that for like 2 seconds.
Huh?
It's a delayed reaction from Ezra.
No, he's brilliant. Yeah. But the reaction made it so worthwhile. Yes, go on.
The sages sent for them, and they did not come. They doubled their salary, and they came.
Do you hear that? Do you hear that, everybody? That house of Avtinas, what happened?
They wanted their more money.
And then, as soon as they got their increase,
money, they came.
Yeah, now continue.
Every day they would take 12 money. On that one day they took 24. The Rabbi says every day they would take 24. On that one day, 48. The sages asked them, "Why did you see fit not to teach others your expertise?" They answered, "Our father's house was aware that this temple was going to be destroyed, and they said, let someone improper learn how to prepare the incense and take it and use it in the service of idol worship.
Okay, so they had a monopoly because they knew how to make the incense and they never taught anybody else how to make the incense. So this was a family with a monopoly. They were the only ones.
First or second Beit HaMikdash? Because it sounds like the first.
That is
Don't
an
let someone
excellent
use it to
question.
make idol worship. They didn't do that in the second Beit HaMikdash as much. The only thing that was a problem with the second Beit HaMikdash was respecting others, which is one reason why the second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa.
Excellent, quite right. Thank you, Ezra. I just wanted, yes.
So did the Mishpahat of Dinas make the Torah in like private, so no one could see?
No. They would make it in the Beit HaMikdash, but they wouldn't share the secret with anybody else of how to create it and how to create this smoke that would come in one strong,
So no one can
pillar.
Look at them while they make it.
Huh?
No one can look at them while they make
And they said, we're not going to teach anyone else how to make it. They said, the reason why we don't want to teach anyone else is because we don't want this secret to come into improper hands. One day the temple would be destroyed. Now that sounds like a very noble thing to do. More than that, as I mentioned elsewhere, the Gemara in this context also says this family never wore perfume because they didn't want anyone to smell the smell of the Ketoret outside of the Beit HaMikdash. So they seem like good people. Nevertheless, notice that the Mishnah says of these people that this is a family that will be condemned. Why? Because of their strike. Because they said they refused to come until their pay was doubled, and then when the pay was doubled, they came.
Rob, don't they? If they had a point though, in terms of if let's say you pay somebody peanuts to do what they do at the point where they cannot support themselves or their family, don't they have a point there?
Oh, so that's a very, very good question. Yeah, I suppose I think the problem I imagine over here is if you're being paid not enough, it seems that their resolution wasn't the correct way to resolve the problem. That's I think that what the rabbis are objecting to is this sort of they created a situation in which they had a monopoly. They were the only people that knew how to create the Ketoret. And once they were the only ones that knew how to create the Ketoret, they used that power in order to affect change. And it seems that the method that they used was inappropriate. That would seem to be what the Gemara is saying. Yes.
And this reminds me a lot of the 19th century Ostrich movement, where you had groups of traditional Jews in Central Europe formally seceding from recognized Jewish communities that were getting dominated by Maskilim and Reform. And they kind of cut off the national unity of the Jewish people because they were trying to avoid assimilation and avoid kind of the bastardization of pure Judaism. It seems like a very similar way that the Beit Abtias were hindering or not allowing the national project of Beit HaMikdash to continue because they were so concerned with the purity and preventing the perversion of these holy things.
Right, yeah. I hear that. A very interesting parallel. In fact, brilliant parallel. Very good. I wanted the Meiri in the second source underneath says something different to you because the way that they presented the situation was very, very noble. We don't want the incense to get into the wrong people's hands. We're not going to teach it to anybody else. Their actions seem very pious and very noble to protect the integrity, like you said, to protect the integrity of the Avodah and the Beit HaMikdash, that things shouldn't get into the wrong hands. So they seem to be really coming from a very good place. The Meiri, that is on the second sword, the bottom of this page, is very, very harsh. I'm going to read what the Meiri says. Kol she'atzibur ro'in ke'echad, be'echad, shenimna lelamed, liru'im lekach. When the Sibor, if ever you're in a situation where you have somebody who could teach but doesn't teach, יכולים לסלקו מאותה אומנות המסורה להם מאצלהם ולמנות אחר תחתיו בלא שום סיבה אחרת. He says, if somebody refuses to teach it, even if they're the experts, you'd be allowed to fire that person and bring an inferior person in order that we shouldn't be held captive by somebody who feels they have a monopoly. And then he goes on, I'm going to miss out this little bit over here. He says, the fact that they refused to come to work and then only came back when their wages were doubled indicates, according to the Meiri, that their intentions were not l'shem shamayim. You follow? So even though, like you were describing Yishai, that they were trying to protect the Beit HaMikdash, they were worried about integrity, the fact that what motivated them to come was a double salary means that everything else that they said lost its integrity. You follow? And therefore, even though, as I mentioned, the Gemara tells us about noble things that they did, we wanted to protect this from getting into the wrong hands. They never wore perfume. They did great things. But this, we're not going to come until double salary. That piece took away their integrity, and as a result, the rabbis didn't trust them. And that's why the Mishnah says, in contrast to the previous Mishnah that speaks about how some people brought glory to the Beit HaMikdash, these people, in the way that they behaved here, brought the opposite to the Beit HaMikdash, and that's why Elu Likna, that these are people who are remembered with condemnation rather than with praise. Even though you could read what they did as noble, it's this double pay thing that really grind. That's the Meiri. Similar to that, the Maharsha writes, that's the previous one over here. So he says, he says it's clear that what motivated these people to work was they were interested in increasing their salary. As soon as that became their focus, I think they lost their integrity. So according to really both the Meiri and also the Maharsha, these were good people doing a wonderful job, making a ketoret in a way that nobody else knew how to make the ketoret. But because it was, what's the word? It was based on the fact that they would get double pay, meaning what would bring them to work is double pay. That sort of took away all of the integrity in what they were doing. The Meiri writes, I mean, it's hard to understand this, about it should be l'shem shamayim, meaning that, I don't know, it's easy to read it, it's very easy to read the Meiri. I think it's very hard to live the Meiri, and that is, you have to understand that whatever money you have it as a result, like it's a gift from shamayim. And you have to have the faith that whatever Hashem gave you, it's a gift from heaven, and therefore this, striking in order to get more wages is not an appropriate way to increase your income. That seems to be what he's saying.
Money worth?
I don't know. It's an excellent question. I wish I could tell you.
If the money is a little bit, which is where they're coming from. If the money is a lot, then it might just be that they were greedy for money for no reason.
Yeah, it could.
Because these people who go on strike are going on strike because they don't have money to pay for their families' education, medical bills, taxes, food, clothing, a bunch of personal needs. If these people are just striking because...
You mean they need their third car, their second vacation?
If they were just striking because they could totally do it and get away with it, then I could see a reason why. But these people who are striking because they're not happy with something that everyone can agree with that they shouldn't be doing at all in the first place. Like low pay, not having a bathroom, not getting enough food, not getting enough free time or something like that.
Sure.
But if these people are just trying because why not we just make money out of it without anyone caring, then I could see a reason why.
So I think I hear what you're saying, that if it's just I have enough but I want more, that's obviously very different to somebody who literally can't feed their family. I think that what I understand from the Gemara is that when there's a person that has sort of a hold on the community, meaning we are dependent on these people for the Ketoret, meaning if you have somebody whose role in society is essential, and then they can hold the rest of the community to ransom, I think that's what's being objected to over here. That's not an appropriate way to solve the problem, because ultimately they were holding the community to ransom. They were the only ones who knew how to do it, and therefore the only option to continue the Ketoret was to give in to their demands. I think that's the first point. The first point that points to something unethical about holding people to ransom. I think that's the first point. We're going to look at one more point and then a summary from recent times. Yes.
I was going to say the one thing that I don't know how it would apply to this case, but it applies with the bus case. So they have unions in the contracts. They know that they have unions, and the unions are the ones organizing the strikes, right?
Right.
So all they're doing is participating in the union activity when they go on strike,
Right.
which is permitted according to the contract.
Right. Correct. Yeah, I think that if you go on strike, I don't think you can be fined if the strike. There are certain criteria that have to be met in order to go on strike. But once a union launches a strike, no one who's a member of the union, their job is not on the line, because they're exactly.
So I don't know if in this story there's somewhere a place where maybe because they said that they had a prophecy in their family that they were allowed to go on strike.
Ah, I see. I don't
Where
know.
do the
Saying, like,
unions
I
get
don't
the
know.
funds?
You're right. There may be. You're right. There could be There are different ways you could read this story, but what you can't change in the story is the Mishnah, who says, well, we sort of know the end of the story right at the beginning, because the Mishnah tells us that this is a family that will be remembered lignai, for condemnation. We know that. And then when we read the story, we're sort of looking into the story to find what aspect of the story it is that makes them worthy of condemnation. And you're right. Both the Meiri that we saw at and also the Marashal, when they read the story, the condemnation is this sense of ransom. You know, the sort of they have a monopoly in the ransom. But you're right, it could be that you could read the story and find another aspect that would be the cause of their condemnation.
I was just wondering the parallel. That's something I don't see in this one.
How do the people in the union, how do they keep themselves afloat during the strike? Does the union have funds to help pay for their needs while they're on strike?
I'm not positive.
No, I don't think you get paid on the day that
I
you
don't think
strike.
you get paid off, but I think the whole thing
That's
is like
the
the
risk.
noise and you make
But-
a big noise, you make a big interruption in normal activity, and then maybe the employer doesn't.
I want to continue. I know we could really speak about this for a long time. There are two more points I'd like to make in the short amount of time that we have left until the end of the shiur. And I want to read with you a very, very well-known letter that was written by a very, very important, prominent Jerusalem rabbi. His name was Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, and Rav Yitzhak Yaakov Weiss, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. Both of them were the poskim, the rabbinic authorities here in Jerusalem, and they were asked by the rabbi of Shaarei Tzedek. Shaarei Tzedek Hospital in Jerusalem is quite unique because it is a hospital that has a rabbinic board, and any question any questions in the hospital, not just about using an elevator on Shabbos or can Kohanim come in, but any ethical questions that might come in procedures done in the hospital are all decided based on halachic rulings. It's a fascinating place. There is actually a center, part of the Shaarei Tzedek Hospital, which deals exclusively in Jewish medical ethics, and therefore it comes as no surprise. In 1986, there was a nursing strike in Israel, and the nurses of Shaarei Tzedek could not strike without consulting whether this was permitted according to halacha. And Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Rav Yitzhak Yaakov Weiss wrote a very, very interesting letter in response to that question. Were you going to add something before we read it?
The end of the letter. My dad, who's a banker, used to always say, he always says, nobody likes a two-handed economist. There's nobody likes a two-handed rabbi. That's a rabbi that goes, on one hand this, but on the other hand that. It's two completely opposing things.
No, so he says, okay, so let's read the letter. So will somebody read the letter? Do you want to read the letter? Is that okay with you, Yishai?
Yeah.
Thank you.
According to Halacha, is a worker strike the proper way of dealing with labor disagreements? Rav Avram Yitzhak Cook, the first chief rabbi of Israel.
Oh, no, the previous bit, the previous one. So the complete
I
nursing
was
stuff.
reading the end of the last.
Oh, we'll get to there.
The following letter was written by Gaon Rav Shalom Elazar Arabah Sefram Racha and Gaon Rav Yitzhak Yaakov Weissman in response to the 1986 nursing strike in Shari Sag Hospital. Erev Shabbat Parsha Shlach 20 Sivan 5746 to the complete nursing staff. We hereby issue a warning with the utmost severity based on our holy Torah. It has come to our attention that as the nursing strike intensified, the situation in the hospital has reached a degree where people's lives are actually in danger. People have nefesh. As we have already ruled in our letter to the hospital's administration, this is a situation where it is appropriate to apply the Code of Jewish Law statement, Yoredea 336.1. A doctor who withholds treatments is tantamount to a murderer. This equally applies to the nursing staff. It is therefore incumbent on all of the nursing staff to return to work at least to all departments of the hospital where patients are cared for.
That's like they have clinics. You know, it means places where people are staying overnight. So if there's a clinic, you know, a daycare where people pop in to see a GP, it seems that the nurses there, you know, taking blood tests and stuff like that, they could strike. But any nurse who is involved in treating patients, when there's a situation of pikuach nefesh, it is forbidden to go on a strike. Now, it's important to contrast that this is different to what we were saying earlier. This is a halachic imperative to prevent pikuach nefesh, you know, to prevent loss of life. There's no justification to go on strike if there's any possibility of danger to life. Whenever there's a possibility of danger to life, then striking cannot be the solution to the labor dispute. That is the ruling of Rosh Hashanah and Oibach. I'm not sure there's anyone that would take issue with that position. I think that's probably a unanimous halachic position, and that is if somebody is involved in work that is involved in, that saves lives, and your strike could, God forbid, lead to loss of life, so then a strike is not a legitimate weapon to use in order to achieve your goal. This is different to what we were saying earlier about the ethics of holding ransom, sort of the monopoly, and separate to the argument that we saw previously. Okay, I want to summarize very quickly Rav Eliezer Melamed, whose books are all over here, a very sensible and clear modern posek, living and writing today. He really, you can read this to yourselves, he really taught there are really two positions, and it goes a little bit back to what we were saying from Rav Lichtenstein earlier. And it really depends on your relationship to halacha. In a situation where your life is bound by consulting with your Rav. Meaning, if you're in a position where you're deciding what employment I should be doing, and you would consult on that issue, meaning if the halachic authorities are involved in your life to the extent that they help you decide which employment is appropriate, then you would turn to them to decide whether it's ethical for you to strike or not strike. For people for whom, a Torah personality, a mentor, would be involved in my decision making in all areas of employment,